Today, we're going to begin our study of poetry. Poetry is an amazing genre made up of different subjects, forms, and structures. There are poems for everyone, and during our study, let us be on the lookout for poems that really connect with you as an individual and ones that you really love. I'll be sure to share some of my favorites too. Today, we're going to get to know the poetry books that we will be reading and studying in this unit. We're going to read several different poetry anthologies, which are collections of poetry and poetry books, as we become more experienced readers of poetry. So this cover of this book is called The Place My Words Are Looking For. As we read this, I want you to think about these two questions. First question, what is this poem about? And also, how does the poem look on the page? So knowing what the poem is about and what it looks like on the page is going to really help us dive into the structure and meaning of every poem. We're going to write down some noticings about poetry as we read through this unit. This is going to be an ongoing list or chart. The things I'd like you to consider. Let's consider the noticings about structure. In other words, how is the writing laid out or designed? Then we'll discuss the noticings about sound in the poem. And finally, we'll also talk about noticings about the images and visualizations. The first poem we'll look at is called The Sidewalk Racer, or On the Skateboard. It's by Lillian Morrison. Just looking at the poem, I'd like you to think about what you think this poem is about and what do you notice? What is the poem about and how does the poem look on the page? Take a moment to read through this poem. You'll need to pause so the video doesn't end. Some of the noticings that I pictured or visualized in this poem as I looked at it were that some lines are short, the lines are broken up in the middle of a sentence, and lines have different lengths, and there's a lot of white space. What did you notice? The next poem is called Enchantment. Based on the title, what might this poem be about? What do you notice about how this poem looks on the page? How is it similar or different from the previous poem? You might have noticed that there's no shape. You also may have noticed that there are short lines, and it looks like one clump of text. Anything else you've noticed? Follow along while I read the poem. Enchantment, Joanne Ryder. On warm summer nights, the porch becomes our living room, where Mama takes her reading and Dad and I play games. In the patch of brightness, the lamp scatters on the floor. From the darkness, others come, small round bodies clinging to the screens which separate us from the yard beyond. Drawn to our light, the June bugs watch our games and listen to our talk till bedtime when Mama darkens the porch and breaks the spell that holds them close to us. This next poem is called What I Remember About the 6th Grade by Mark Vinz. What do you think this text might be about? What do you notice about the structure? What I Remember About the 6th Grade by Mark Vinz. We lost the school softball championship when that four-eyed kid popped out with the bases loaded. We did win the spelling bee, though. Weird Charlie said it was because he had the ugliest girls. The scarlet tanager edged out the wood duck in our balloting for the state bird because the girls liked red and organized. I voted for the blue jay, or maybe the loon. Weird Charlie voted for the crow. The teacher nearly got knocked cold when a big picture of George Washington or somebody fell off the wall and conked her on the head. Most of the girls cried. Most of the boys laughed, especially Weird Charlie. Once a month or so, they'd herd us to the basement for atomic bomb drills and films of houses exploding in firestorms when it came to the nuclear age. Even Weird Charlie kept his mouth shut. There have been several observations that could have been made about the subjects and appearance of the structure of every one of these poems. Poems are often chosen or written with white space on the page. Different poets change their ideas of how they shape their poems and how they break up their lines to create meaning. They also change the way that they group their lines into stanzas. We also notice that poets write about a range of subjects. We're going to continue to think about these elements as we move forward with our study to help us build our understanding of poetry. The last things discussed were that some lines are long. If you didn't notice, in some of these poems, the lines are much longer than others. Some poems have stanzas. A stanza is a group of 4 or more lines that have a rhythm, and some don't have stanzas. Some lines in some of these poems are sentences with end punctuation, while others are not. While we continue to study this unit in poetry, I'd like you to consider the things you notice about the structure or how each poem is built. In the following poems, we will see many different structures, and I'd like you to consider each of these things. The line length and the shapes, potentially, if there are shapes. Also, look at the amount of space. Is there punctuation? How did the poet decide to structure their poem?